happiness?
やっほー僕の名前はアストルフォ
A few days after the 2020 election, ThoughtSlime released a video saying democratic countries are not actually democratic. The main country discussed is America. His main points are that the US was both historically and currently undemocratic. His points show that he wants to get rid of the democratic system because it doesn't have the outcomes he personally wants. He starts the video by reading the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. He derides the United States for not only failing to live up to the ideals of democracy, but never being intended to in the first place. He says he doesn't like America because of its imperialism and genocides.
Now, I'm no fan of America because of all the imperialism and genocides you see.
On the imperialism side, America was relatively unimperialistic compared to the other nations of the world. The worst imperialism the United States did was the displacement of Native Americans, and that was in the 1800s. The final act of aggressive imperialist expansion America did was the Spanish-American War, which resulted in the acquisition of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. After World War II, the United States actively supported decolonization, such as in events like the independence of the Dutch East Indies and the Suez Crisis. As for the genocides, it is true that America committed horrible atrocities against natives in the 1800s. It is one of the most shameful parts of our history, but I don't think condemning a country today for atrocities it committed in the past makes sense. If we were to use this standard, we would have to condemn many free and democratic countries. We should judge countries on how they are currently.
Of course, it was always a grift. These words were written, at least in part, by a slave-owning rapist who considered it his personal mission in life to exterminate the indigenous population.
He goes on to criticize Thomas Jefferson. The first two criticisms are apt, although there is more nuance to the first. Jefferson was actually against the institution of slavery and worked towards limiting it. This does mean, however, that Jefferson realized what he was doing was morally wrong. Jefferson was not a good person, but that doesn't mean the good that he did should be ignored. His third point about Jefferson is just wrong. Jefferson did not want to eradicate the natives. He actually wanted to incorporate the natives into America, and was in favor of intermarriage. He did, however, want to do this forcefully. Natives who were unwilling to integrate were to be removed to the west of the Mississippi River. His next criticism of Jefferson is really stupid.
Sure, he said that all men are created equal and have the unalienable right to life, liberty, etc., but he also thought some men were less than others, about 3/5 of others, and that therefore they did not have the right to life, or liberty, etc.
It's so stupid that he actually has a bunch of text scroll on the screen that says it's a misrepresentation. If you said it and later found it to be inaccurate, there was no reason for you not to cut it out. Not everyone is going to pause the video and read all that text. I believe the only reason ThoughtSlime didn't cut this out was for emotional effect. He then impugns the US for originally only allowing property owners to vote.
Also, back in the old days, only property owners got the franchise, so that kinda illustrates beyond the shadow of a meaningful doubt that America as a project was designed for the benefit of wealthy white men.
The requirements for voting were actually left up to the states. In Pennsylvania, for instance, that was not the case. After giving some ill-informed predictions of the future, ThoughtSlime goes on to say that no current or former government has been controlled by the people.
We've let ourselves be lulled into a false sense of security that we control the mechanisms of government, but we never have. And I'm not just talking about Americans here. None of us are in control of our governments.
He elaborates on this by giving examples of Jeff Bezos having more power than regular people and saying this means their rights are worthless. His first example is on property rights.
I mean, you both have the right to own and dispose of property, but that right means a lot less when your assets aren't worth the GDP of most countries. We're all allowed to do the same things Jeff Bezos does, to own multi-billion-dollar companies and run them for our personal benefit, but that doesn't mean we're able to.
Just because Bezos is successful doesn't mean others can't be. Starting a business is difficult because you need capital, but good policies can help more people have a shot at having successful endeavors, such as UBI. His second point is on freedom of speech.
You have freedom of speech, just like Jeff Bezos does, but don't say anything too radical or else who's going to hire you?
This point raises an interesting question. Should political ideology be a protected class like race or sex when it comes to hiring practices? If your answer is yes, like ThoughtSlime seems to be implying, You would have to apply these standards equally. This means you wouldn't be able to turn away fascists, along with communists, and I don't know if he thought of that. The third point is on freedom of movement.
Don't like where you live? You have freedom of movement, just like Jeff Bezos. You know, assuming that you can find work or shelter wherever it is you'd prefer to be, and your current employer or landlord will let you out of your contract.
Should you be able to move to any place and have a house waiting for you? If there was some kind of public housing, that may be possible. But that would mean there would always need to be spare houses for people moving there. Alternatively, you could have a waiting list, where when someone moves out of public housing, someone else could move in, but that would still not be total free movement. If there are policies to pursue that could help with these problems ThoughtSlime has, why, you may ask, does he not push for them? That leads us to his fourth point, where he presents multiple reasons he believes voting is not helpful.
And most importantly, you have the right to vote just like Jeff Bezos.
The way he said that makes me uncomfortable. This point consists of multiple rapid-fire points without elaboration.
Once every few years.
I don't know what it's like in Leafland, but in America there are many different elections for different offices each year. These are mostly local, but they're still important. What Leaf Boy is referring to is the presidential election, and that is extremely reductive. The lack of involvement in local government is unfortunate, and ThoughtSlime is doing a disservice by ignoring them.
On whichever of the candidates are presented to you, regardless of whether or not you agree with either of their platforms.
This point continues the trend of ThoughtSlime not knowing how American democracy functions. The two candidates are not just presented to you. There is a primary election in which voters choose which candidate they want to represent their party. If you don't agree with either candidate, that's too bad. That's how democracy works.
And also, if you live in the wrong part of the country, your vote might not count.
This is a criticism of the Electoral College. I agree it's dumb, but it doesn't make your vote not count. Your vote counts towards how your state will vote. If he really wanted to point out an issue, he could have brought up how in some parts of the country, you can't vote for president at all. In the US territories, sans DC, the people have no federal voting power, but he didn't bring that up. Is it because the territories are mostly POC, and ThoughtSlime is a racist bastard? Who knows?
And also, if you're in prison, you don't get to vote anymore.
Prison is meant to keep people who are harmful to society out of society, so it makes sense for people in prison to lose the right to vote. However, many states don't allow felons to vote even after they've served their time, which is stupid.
And also, the people you would be voting on are the ones who decide what will and will not put you in prison, so that seems like kind of a loophole.
This point is dumb because people vote for representatives, and the representatives make laws. If the majority decides to make something illegal, that's democracy.
Also, the people in power will do everything they can to make sure voting is difficult and confusing.
Voting is not difficult and confusing. I don't know what he even means here. You fill out a form to register, some states even have an auto-registry, get told where your polling place is, and then go to that place to cast your vote.
And even outright interfere with the democratic process if it suits their interests.
This is really vague, but if he's talking about something like purging voter rolls for infrequent voters, yes, that's a problem. After firing off all those points, he says,
You probably think, and you're not wrong, that electoralism is a distraction. And if you just ignore it, you can concentrate on other stuff. But see, the thing is, they thought of that. They realized, hey, wait a minute, people might stop doing this, and thereby take away the pretense through which we rule them.
What do you mean, other stuff? Revolution? This shows how ThoughtSlime is actually authoritarian. He wants to overthrow our current government, even though people of his ideology are in the minority. And how would more people not voting delegitimize the government? They had the chance to vote, but they chose not to.
So, what they'll do every time is present a choice so hideous that not voting will be calamitous.
Like I said earlier, the people voted in primaries for those candidates. They, whoever that is, did not present anything.
I think people overstate the importance of voting, but it's not literally nothing. It's more than doing nothing, in the literal sense of the words. Sometimes it's the difference between letting a fascist take power or letting the guys who handed the fascists power take over. And I guess given that incredibly dismal choice, I'd prefer the latter, and I assume you would too.
Here, ThoughtSlime reinforces the idea that voting is unimportant, and then makes a weird point criticizing Obama and Biden for handing power over to Trump. What were they supposed to do? Refuse to leave office? More evidence of ThoughtSlime being an authoritarian.
But of course, there are only like 5 major media companies, and they all have complete control over the information that gets broadcast to the electorate.
There's also public broadcasting, such as PBS and NPR.
These international conglomerates, as you might expect, don't necessarily have our best interests in mind. And if they choose to create a narrative which swings the election one way or another, there's nothing we can do about it.
No one is forced to watch broadcasting from a major company. They choose to of their own volition.
The information at hand, for most people, the information blasted into their synapses at all times, is propaganda to justify the status quo.
Anyone can easily access information that's not from mainstream sources. People aren't brainwashed just because they disagree with you.
We gave representative democracy a couple centuries to sort its shit out, and this is where we are, sick, poor, and pissing away our home planet. It's time for the people to be in charge for a change, and if you think that's too big a risk, too big an unknown, I have to ask, why are we sticking with something we know doesn't work, rather than trying something that might not work?
ThoughtSlime's final point is that we should get rid of representative democracy in exchange for, presumably, anarchism. He says there's no reason not to because we know democracy doesn't work, but the alternative system that he doesn't describe only might not work. This point is ridiculous because systems aren't just don't work and do work. Most people are fine in the system that exists today. The reason people don't want to throw away democracy for some unknown is that they don't want to get rid of a system that is generally okay for a system that could be much worse. ThoughtSlime wants to get rid of liberal democracy because its history is imperfect and he doesn't like the candidates people choose. He could push for policies that he thinks would help people, but he instead just complains on the internet about how the system is rigged. I greatly appreciate the feedback on my first video. If anyone has any suggestions on channels, commie or otherwise, that I should respond to, I'd love to hear them.